The Skinwalker Enigma by your writer name here prologue. The shadow of the mountain Uinta Basin, Utah, 1,973. The air in late October carried a crystalline bite, a promise of the winter that would soon clamp its jaws on the high desert. Elias Thorne, a geologist with more curiosity than was good for him, guided his dusty Ford pickup along a rutted track that was more suggestion than road. He wasn't supposed to be here. The land was private, a sprawling ranch owned by a family who valued their solitude and their cattle in that order. But the seismic readings from the USGS outpost 30 miles away had shown a persistent low-frequency hum emanating from this specific quadrant. It wasn't tectonic, it wasn't oil drilling. It was something else. He parked the truck behind a crumbling escarpment of red rock, the engines ticking loud in the immense silence. A golden eagle circled high above a lonely sentinel in a sea of blue. Elias grabbed his pack, which contained a magnetometer, a Geiger counter, and a thermos of lukewarm coffee. His son Eris, only 7 years old, had begged to come along on his rock hunting trip. Elias had refused. This wasn't for a child. An inexplicable dread had coiled in his gut for days, a feeling that what he was walking toward was ancient and utterly indifferent to human life. He followed the magnetometer's twitching needle east toward a formidable mesa that rose from the basin floor like the petrified hull of some colossal, long-dead leviathan. The hum grew stronger here, not just a reading on a dial, but a physical vibration that resonated in the bones of his feet and the fillings in his teeth. The scrub-covered ground was littered with basalt and sandstone, but as he neared the base of the mesa, he saw something else. Metal. Not the rusted detritus of farm equipment, but strange, twisted fragments that seemed to have been torn apart by impossible forces. He knelt, picking up a piece. It was cool to the touch, impossibly dense, and weighed far more than its size suggested. The alloy was a silvery black, with a surface that seemed to drink the harsh sunlight, reflecting nothing. It had no seams, no rivets, no sign of human manufacturing. The Geiger counter in his pack remained silent. No radiation. His gaze was drawn upward along the sheer cliff face of the mesa. About 200 feet up there was a dark cleft in the rock, a cave-like opening that looked less like natural erosion and more like a puncture wound. The magnetometer's needle was now spinning wildly, its delicate mechanism overwhelmed. A primal instinct screamed at him to turn back to get in his truck and drive until the needle settled and the hum faded from his bones. But the scientist in him, the man who had dedicated his life to uncovering the Earth's secrets, was more powerful. He had to know. The climb was treacherous. Loose scree shifted under his boots, and the rock face was brittle. As he neared the opening, the air grew cold, the temperature dropping a good 20 degrees. A low modulated tone now replaced the hum, a sound like a choir of dissonant cellos playing a single unending note. He pulled himself over the final ledge and into the opening. It wasn't a cave, it was a tunnel, perfectly cylindrical, boring straight into the heart of the mountain. The walls were smooth, not with the polish of water, but with the vitrified sheen of rock that had been melted and instantly cooled. They glowed with a faint internal luminescence, a sickly blue-green light that cast long, distorted shadows. He took a tentative step inside. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and organic like blood and batteries. The strange choir-like sound was all encompassing now, pressing in on him, and he felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the ground beneath him was no longer stable. He took another step, and the world dissolved. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a disassembly of reality. He saw the rock of the mesa become transparent, revealing the layers of geologic time. He saw the valley not as it was, but as it had been 1,000,000 years ago, teeming with monstrous life under a swollen alien Sunday. He saw the future cities of light and glass rising and falling in the blink of an eye. He saw stars being born and dying. He saw shapes that moved in the angles between dimensions, things of impossible geometry and malevolent intelligence. His mind, a fragile vessel built to perceive 3 dimensions and linear time, shattered. He screamed a raw, ragged sound that was swallowed by the tunnel's unholy music. When he stumbled back out onto the ledge, gasping in the cold, clean air, he didn't know how much time had passed. The sun was lower, painting the basin in hues of orange and purple. The fragments of metal were gone. The hum was gone. The needle on his magnetometer was still. He scrambled down the rock face, tearing his hands, his mind a whirlwind of impossible images. He drove home in a daze, the setting sun a searing fire in his rearview mirror. Elias Thorne never spoke of what he saw on the mesa. He quit the USGS a month later. He became a quiet, withdrawn man, prone to staring at the night sky with an expression of profound terror. His son Eris grew up with a father who was a ghost, a man haunted by a secret he could never share. All Eris knew was that on a day in October, his father had gone out to hunt for rocks and had come back a different person, broken by something hidden in the heart of the Utah desert. And in the deep, silent core of the mesa, the something that had touched his mind waited. It had been there for millennia. It was patient. It knew that the curious, fragile creatures that crawled on the surface would eventually come back. They always did. Part 1. The Cage of Reason, Chapter 1. 50 years later, Dr. Eris Thorne believed in a universe governed by elegant, immutable laws. He believed in Maxwell's equations, in the beautiful symmetry of general relativity, and in the probabilistic yet ultimately predictable dance of quantum mechanics. He did not under any circumstances believe in ghosts, poltergeists, or little green men, which made his current location an exercise in supreme irony. He stood on a windswept bluff overlooking a sprawling 512-acre property that the locals and a surprisingly well-funded research group called Skinwalker Ranch. The name itself was an offense to his sensibilities, conjuring images of cheap horror movies and campfire tales. Yet here he was, the newly hired head of theoretical analysis, brought in to be the ultimate skeptic, the man who would finally bring the hammer of rigorous science down on the anvil of high strangeness. "It's big," he said the word inadequate. The Utah landscape stretched out in every direction, a stark panorama of red rock, gray-green scrub, and a sky so vast it felt like a physical weight. Dr. Evan Hayes, the project's lead astrophysicist, and a man whose enthusiasm was as boundless as the sky, grinned beside him. "Big and busy. Don't let the quiet fool you, Eris. This place is the busiest paranormal intersection on the planet." Eris suppressed a sigh. Paranormal. The word was like nails on a chalkboard. "Evan, we agreed. We call them anomalous phenomena. It lends a certain dignity to the proceedings." "Call it what you want." "It's still weird as hell," a third voice growled. Cale Mastos, universally known as Dragon, was the ranch's head of security. He was a mountain of a man with a shaved head, a braided beard, and the quiet, unnerving stillness of a predator. He'd spent 20 years in special operations, and it showed in the way he scanned the horizon, his eyes missing nothing. "Our immediate focus is over there," Hayes said, pointing towards the same mesa that had haunted Eris's father's life. It dominated the eastern view, a monolithic block of stone that seemed to absorb the afternoon light. "We're calling it the Mesa. Creative, I know." "What's the project?" Eris asked, pulling the collar of his jacket tighter against the persistent wind. "Horizontal drilling," Hayes explained. "For the last 3 years, our data ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, magnetometry has consistently pointed to a massive, dense object buried inside the mesa. It's roughly 400 feet long, dome-shaped. Think of a submerged submarine, and it's surrounded by a number of smaller, equally dense anomalies." Eris felt a flicker of genuine interest. "A metallic meteor fragment, a unique geological formation." Dragon snorted. "Geological formations don't stop hardened steel drill bits cold. We've broken 3 rigs trying to get a core sample. Whatever's in there is harder than anything we can throw at it." So the new plan, Hayes continued, is to drill 2 boreholes, one on each side of the main object, all the way through to the top of the mesa. It'll allow us to insert scanning equipment, fiber optic cameras, electromagnetic sensors, you name it, to get a picture of what we're dealing with without trying to punch through it directly. They drove down from the bluff in an all-terrain vehicle, heading towards a cluster of buildings and equipment at the mesa's base. The scale of the drilling operation was impressive. A powerful horizontal rig was positioned before the rock, face its steel frame, a stark piece of modern industry against the ancient stone. A team from a company called Mark Construction was overseeing the work. Eris was introduced to Thomas, the crew foreman, a grizzled man with oil-stained hands and a perpetually weary expression. "How's it going?" Thomas Hayes asked. Thomas wiped his brow with the back of a glove. "It's going. Or it was. We've hit another snag." He pointed to a long, thick steel rod being carefully extracted from the borehole. "The beacon quit transponding." Again. "The beacon?" Eris inquired. "It's a device inside the drill head," Thomas explained. "Sends a signal to our receiver up here. Tells us our depth, direction, pitch, yaw. Without it, we're drilling blind. And in this rock drilling blind is how you lose a $500,000 drill string." It just stopped, like a switch was flipped. We were at 198 feet, making good progress. Then nothing. We pulled it back, checked the signal at the surface, worked fine. Put it back in, pushed to 180 feet, and it died again. Sooner this time. Eris walked over to the command console, a weatherproofed array of monitors displaying the drill's vital statistics. or they had been. Now the directional data was a string of frozen numbers. Watch the beacon's frequency. It's a standard RF signal. Nothing exotic, Hayes said, coming up behind him. Any significant magnetic ore deposits in the mesa that could shield or scramble the signal, Aris theorized. It was the simplest, most logical explanation. We thought of that, Hayes said. The magnetometry readings are high, but they're not off the charts. Nothing that should completely block a signal this powerful at a mere 200 feet. The crew successfully retrieved the beacon. It was a robust, self-contained unit. They swapped the battery, recalibrated it with the surface receiver, and got a perfect, strong signal. Everything's paired up. We're getting all the data the young rig operator Alex confirmed. All right, Thomas grunted. Let's send it back home. Aris, Hayes, and Dragon watched as the long string of rods was painstakingly fed back into the borehole. The powerful hydraulic motors whined, pushing the drill bit deeper into the mesa. On the monitor, Aris watched the depth reading tick upward 50 feet, 100 feet, 150 feet. The signal was clear and strong. Maybe it was just a faulty battery connection, Aris suggested, feeling a familiar sense of satisfaction. Every problem had a rational solution. At 175 feet, the signal on the monitor flickered. At 180 feet, it vanished. And I lost him, Alex said, his voice a mixture of frustration and disbelief. Lost him again. Thomas slammed a fist against the rig's chassis. Damn it, we didn't even get back to where we were before. Aris stared at the blank data fields on the screen. It made no sense. The new battery was fine, the unit was calibrated, it worked perfectly outside the rock. But at a specific depth, something inside the mountain was simply deleting the signal. It wasn't blocking it. The spectrum analyzer showed no evidence of jamming or gradual signal decay. The signal was there one moment and gone the next. There's something in there that's not just passive, Hayes murmured, his voice low. It's actively interfering. Or Aris countered, though his own confidence was beginning to fray, there's an environmental factor we haven't accounted for. A pressure-sensitive flaw in the beacon's casing, a focused electromagnetic dead zone. Dragon, who had been silently observing, spoke up. This place doesn't do things by halves. It doesn't just interfere. It responds. He looked from the borehole to the vast silent mesa. It knows we're knocking on the door. That night, Aris sat in the small Spartan office, assigned to him in the command center a glorified double-wide trailer, packed with more processing power than a small university. He pored over the geological surveys, the magnetometry logs, the seismic data. He built models on his computer, simulating every conceivable natural phenomenon that could cause such a precise, repeatable equipment failure. Nothing fit. He felt a sliver of an unfamiliar emotion, intellectual fear, the fear of a mathematician who finds a number that breaks all known rules. The data was clean, the equipment was sound, the methodology was rigorous, but the result was impossible. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. Through the window, the mesa was a black silhouette against a star-dusted sky. For the first time, he felt the same unease he'd sometimes seen in his father's eyes. The feeling of standing at the edge of a vast unknown ocean, armed with nothing but a thimble. The universe he believed in was orderly and comprehensible. But something in that mountain was playing by a different set of rules. And Aris Thorne, for all his brilliance, didn't have the rule book. Chapter 2. The drilling operation was on hold. A new military-grade beacon shielded against everything up to a direct electromagnetic pulse was being flown in, but it would be a week at best. The ranch, however, never slept. While the Mesa project was stalled, another even stranger experiment was being prepped in the geographic center of the property, a flat triangular patch of land that the team had ominously dubbed the Triangle. Aris learned that the Triangle was the ranch's grand central station for anomalous events. UAPs, the modern, more respectable term for UFOs, had been filmed there. Strange energy signals, particularly a persistent and intelligent-seeming spike at 1.6 gigahertz, were common. A recent LiDAR scan had revealed a massive, invisible, cone-shaped anomaly hanging in the air 2,000 feet above it, a geometric ghost in the machine. The plan for the evening was audacious. A company called Sky Elements, specializing in drone light shows, had been brought in with 1,000 GPS-guided drones. We're going to paint the sky, Hayes explained to Aris as they stood in the triangle watching the Sky Elements team methodically place the drones in a precise grid on the ground. We'll send them up in pre-programmed formations, straight parallel lines rising to different altitudes. We'll be tracking their GPS positions to a centimeter. If there's anything up there, a gravitational anomaly, an energy field, a distortion in space-time, it should affect their flight paths. they'll deviate from the straight lines. It's like throwing 1,000 pieces of confetti into the wind to see the currents. Eris mused, appreciating the simple elegance of the concept. The scale of the setup was staggering. High-speed cameras were positioned around the triangle. A FLIR thermal camera was aimed at the sky. Dragon's team had set up a perimeter. And a group of technicians from Omnitech, Jim Royston and Sam DeRizzo, were setting up their own multi-sensor scanning systems. Eris and Hayes would be monitoring a bank of spectrum analyzers hunting for that elusive 1.6 gigahertz signal. To add another layer of stimulus, they planned to launch high-powered rockets through the airspace just before and during the drone flight. "We've found that sometimes you have to poke the hornet's nest to get a reaction," Hayes said with a grin. As twilight bled from the sky, a palpable sense of anticipation settled over the team. This was not just an experiment. It felt like a performance for an unseen audience. "Okay, guys," Hayes' voice crackled over the radio. "GPS tracker on the first rocket is looking good. We're ready for the preliminary launch. Give me a countdown." From the launch pad, a voice called back. "Going hot on the battery. Rocket is hot. Arming launching in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The rocket shot into the darkening sky with a visceral roar, a streak of fire against the deep indigo. Eris watched its telemetry on a laptop, his eyes tracing the clean arc of its ascent. Everything was nominal. Then chaos erupted. "Hey, what's with the drones?" a technician shouted. "They're not sinking." Eris looked over at the grid of 1,000 drones on the ground. Their indicator lights were supposed to be blinking in unison, a steady, rhythmic pulse. Instead, they were flashing erratically, a field of discordant fireflies. "Everything's disconnected." Preston Ward, the lead from Sky Elements, said into his headset, his voice tight with frustration. "The base station can't establish a stable link. It's like they're all individually deaf." Simultaneously, a sharp cry went up from Dragon, who was scanning the sky with military-grade night vision goggles. "Contact high north over the mesa." Eris and Hayes spun around their eyes, straining against the darkness. A light appeared impossibly bright, moving with a speed and silence that defied any known aircraft. It was not a satellite. It was too bright, too low. It was not a plane. There were no navigation lights, no sound. It flared with brilliant intensity for a moment, a pinpoint of pure white energy, and then as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. "Did you see that Hayes breathed?" "I saw a light," Eris said carefully, his mind racing through possibilities. "A high-altitude weather balloon catching the last rays of the sun, a meteor." "Eric, you got anything on ADS-B Hayes radioed to the command center?" The reply was swift. "Negative, Evan. Closest aircraft is a Delta flight at 35000 feet 100 miles south. That was not a plane." As if on cue, the radio from the Omnitech station crackled. "Travis, we just lost the signal from our primary antenna. It went down the instant that light appeared." Coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. A cascade of unrelated equipment failures. Eris clung to the thought like a life raft. A rocket launch could create a temporary ionospheric disturbance affecting radio communications. The light could be an unrelated phenomenon. But then his own equipment came alive. The spectrum analyzer monitoring the sky-facing antenna shrieked. A powerful structured signal at 1.62 gigahertz had just bloomed into existence. It wasn't static or noise. It had a clear repeating pattern, almost like a digital handshake. "I've got it," Eris said, his voice hushed. 1.62 gigahertz. It's strong, and it sounds like he demodulated the signal, piping the audio through a small speaker. A series of chirps and warbles filled the air, a sound that was unnervingly biological, like the call of some electronic creature, like communication. "Where's it coming from?" Hayes asked, leaning over his shoulder. The sky-facing antenna, Eris confirmed. "It's coming from right where we saw that UAP." Suddenly, the signal vanished from that channel and reappeared on another. The antenna pointed directly at the launch pad in the triangle. "What the hell?" Eris muttered, switching his focus. "It's here now, on the ground." Then it jumped again, this time to the antenna aimed at the east field, then to the one aimed south. Within seconds, the signal was appearing on every antenna, simultaneously coming from every direction at once. "That's impossible," Eris whispered. "For a single source to be detected like that, it would have to be everywhere. Or nowhere. It's violating the inverse square law. The signal strength isn't dropping with distance." Hayes stared at him, his face illuminated by the green glow of the monitors. "Welcome to the ranch, Eris." Despite the chaos, the Sky Elements team managed to wrestle 200 of the 10000 drones back into a stable connection. "We're launching what we've got," Preston announced over the radio. 60 seconds to liftoff. Let's get another rocket up there, Hayes decided. Maybe we can see what it interacts with. Arming the launch, Tech called out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch. The second rocket failed to ignite. At the same moment, the 200 drones lifted off the ground, and all hell broke loose. They rose to about 30 feet, their lights forming two wavering, unstable lines. Then they began to fall. Not all at once, but in a sickening, random cascade. Drones simply lost power and tumbled out of the air, crashing into the dirt. Some wobbled violently, smashing into each other with sharp cracks of plastic. "They're not holding formation," Preston yelled. "GPS is all over the place. I can't control them." One drone, instead of falling, veered wildly off course, flying straight towards the command tent where Eris and Hayes were standing. Dragon instinctively shoved them back as the device, buzzing like an angry hornet, shot past their heads and smashed into a supply crate. "Everybody back," Dragon roared. "It's raining drones!" Amidst the chaos, a new player entered the field. Caleb McEwen, an FPV first-person view drone pilot, had launched his own high-speed racing drone. Wearing a set of goggles that put him in the virtual cockpit, his goal was to fly through the malfunctioning swarm, his onboard camera potentially capturing whatever was affecting them. Eris watched the live feed from the FPV drone on a monitor. The view was breathtaking and terrifying, a pilot's eye perspective weaving through the dying swarm. For a minute, the flight was stable. Caleb skillfully maneuvered through the tumbling drones. Then the feed filled with static. "Lost video," Caleb yelled, ripping off his goggles. "Lost telemetry. It's gone." A moment later, they heard a faint, distant thud. The FPV drone was down. The remaining light show drones, maybe 100 of them, aborted their mission and began to return to their landing coordinates. The experiment was a catastrophic failure. Later that night, as the team collected the fallen broken drones, an exhausted quiet fell over the triangle. The 1.6 gigahertz signal was gone. The sky was clear and silent. Dragon's team went searching for the lost FPV drone. They expected to find it somewhere in the triangle near its last known position. They found it 2 hours later. It was on top of the mesa. It was over half a mile away and several hundred feet higher from where it had lost signal. More bizarrely, it was largely intact with only a broken propeller. The onboard GoPro camera was still attached. Back in the command center, they huddled around a monitor as Eric, the data analyst, played the footage from the recovered camera. The video showed the drone's perspective as it flew through the swarm. The audio picked up the high-pitched whine of its motors. Everything looked normal. Then, at the exact moment the video feed had cut out, the footage showed something else. The drone was flying in open, empty air at an altitude of about 120 feet. There was a loud, sharp smack on the audio, as if the drone had collided with a solid object. The camera view instantly pitched into a wild, uncontrollable spiral. They played it back frame by frame. There was nothing there. One frame showed empty sky in front of the drone. The next frame, the drone was tumbling. It hit something, Caleb said, his voice barely a whisper, but there was nothing to hit. I was in clear air. "Something knocked it out of the sky," Hayes said, his expression grim. "Something invisible." Eris stared at the screen, his carefully constructed cage of reason now riddled with holes, a signal that came from everywhere at once. 1,000 machines failing in unison after a silent, unidentified object passed overhead. A drone colliding with nothingness and being teleported half a mile away. These were not data points that fit into any known model of physics. This was something new, something impossible. He thought of his father, of the terror in his eyes. He was beginning to understand. Part 2 echoes in the Static Chapter 3. The 2 days following the drone swarm debacle were a blur of data analysis. Eris, Hayes, and Eric sequestered themselves in the command center, fueled by coffee and a shared obsessive need for answers. They reviewed every frame of high-speed video, every byte of GPS log data, every millisecond of the electromagnetic spectrum recordings. The picture that emerged was not one of clarity, but of deeper, more profound confusion. The first revelation came from the thermal camera footage. While the team had been distracted by the visible UAP over the mesa, the FLIR camera, pointing straight up from the triangle, had captured something else entirely. "This was taken right around the time Caleb's drone went down," Eric said, pointing to his monitor. He played the clip. The image showed the cool, dark sky. Then, a point of heat bloomed into view. It moved with a smooth, graceful intelligence, not like a bird or a bug close to the lens, but like a self-luminous object in the middle to high atmosphere. It performed a slow, elegant loop before fading from view. It had been completely invisible to the naked eye. "So there was another one," Hayes murmured. "One we didn't even see." "It gets weirder," Eric said, pulling up another file. "This is from the high-speed camera that was looking straight up through the drone swarm's flight path. I've had to increase the contrast to make them visible." He played the new clip. At normal speed, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then he slowed it down, advancing it frame by frame. Tiny faint points of light became visible. They were moving at incredible speed, zipping through the airspace where the drones were attempting to fly. At first, I thought it was cosmic rays hitting the sensor or digital noise, Eric explained. But they're not random. Watch. He isolated 2 of the lights. They moved in perfect, synchronized formation, maintaining a constant distance from each other as they executed a sharp 90-degree turn that would have subjected any physical object to crushing G-forces. In other parts of the 20-second clip, dozens of these lights appeared, sometimes flying in loose clusters, sometimes in tight geometric patterns. They're behaving like a squadron of fighters, Dragon observed, having come in to review the findings, coordinated, purposeful. And there are hundreds of them. Eris added, his eyes glued to the screen. The air above the triangle was saturated with these things. We were blind to it, but we flew a multi-million-dollar experiment right into a traffic lane, a patrol zone. No wonder the drones failed, Hayes said, pacing behind them. If each of these things carries even a minor EM field, the cumulative interference would be overwhelming. It would be like trying to have a conversation in a room where everyone is screaming. The final, most baffling piece of evidence came from the logs of the few drones that had briefly maintained a GPS lock before failing. Eric had plotted their recorded positions onto a satellite map of the ranch. Okay, this is where it breaks your brain, Eric warned them. He pointed to a cluster of green dots showing the drone's liftoff position in the triangle. They rise to about 30 feet. Then, for a period of about 2 to 3 seconds before their systems crashed, their internal GPS recorded their position as here. He clicked his mouse, and the map zoomed out, and then back in on a location over half a mile away, a specific point at the base of the mesa in an area known as the East Field. No, Eris said, shaking his head. That's not possible. They didn't fly there. We saw them. They were hovering right above the launch pad. Their engines couldn't have moved them that fast. Hayes calculated aloud. That's a velocity of nearly 1,000 miles per hour, achieved instantly with no acceleration. They didn't fly there. Eric repeated his expression, dead serious. But for a few seconds, their onboard systems, the very devices that navigate using signals from military satellites in orbit, were utterly convinced they were there. Something fooled the entire GPS network, but only in the localized vicinity of those drones. A GPS spoofing attack, Dragon suggested. A spoofer tricks a receiver into thinking it's somewhere else, Eris countered, thinking aloud. It requires broadcasting a powerful fake GPS signal. We would have seen that on the spectrum analyzers. We didn't. This is different. It's not that the drones received the wrong signal, it's that they were from the perspective of the space-time they were occupying briefly in that other location. The GPS was reporting their position correctly within their localized translocated frame of reference. The room fell silent. The implications of what Eris had just said were staggering. Teleportation, not of matter, but of spatial coordinates. Hayes finally broke the silence. The East Field endpoint. That's the exact spot where we've seen a UAP enter the mesa, and the drones jumped there at an altitude of 30 feet. Eris, isn't that the same altitude where we've seen rockets explode and where that blob anomaly was detected? Eris felt a cold dread wash over him. It was all connected. The mesa, the triangle, the 30-foot altitude, the 1.6 gigahertz signal. They were not separate phenomena. They were symptoms of a single underlying system of impossible physics. The ranch wasn't just a collection of random weirdnesses, it was a machine. And they were poking it with sticks. We have to repeat the experiment, Eris said, a new, almost feverish intensity in his voice. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a burning, desperate need to understand. But we need to be smarter. We need to provoke a larger reaction and gather more data. What are you proposing? Dragon asked, his arms crossed, his expression wary. We split the forces Eris outlined, moving to a large whiteboard. Sky Elements brings all 1,000 drones back. We put 600 of them here in the triangle. We put the other 400 inches the east field at the endpoint. We launch them simultaneously. We'll have rockets at both locations. We'll have Caleb fly his FPV drone again. And we need to add another element. He looked at Hayes, Jim Royston's LiDAR drone, the one that detected the invisible cone. We need him to fly it on a direct path between the triangle and the east field during the swarm launch. We need to map the space between the two hotspots. You want to light the whole place up at once, Hayes said, a slow grin spreading across his face. A ranch-wide experiment. I love it. You're assuming whatever is here will let you, Dragon cautioned. Last time it shut us down before we even got started. This time it might not be so gentle. That's a risk we have to take, Eris said firmly. We're past the point of passive observation. This is an active intelligence, or at least a reactive system. The only way to understand how it works is to give it a complex multivariable problem and see how it responds. For the first time since Eris had arrived, he saw a flicker of respect in Dragon's eyes. All right, Doctor, you want to throw a rock at the beehive. I'll just make sure I'm standing by with a fire hose. The plan was set. The call was made to Sky Elements, who, to their credit, were just as eager for a rematch, despite the loss of dozens of drones. They would be back in 2 days. As Eris walked back to his quarters that night, the cold desert wind whipping around him, he felt a profound shift within himself. The man who had arrived seeking to impose order and reason upon a world of chaotic anecdotes was gone. In his place was someone who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back with intelligent, geometric eyes. He no longer believed in the universe he had known. He now knew with terrifying certainty that the elegant laws he had cherished were merely local ordinances applicable only in the quiet, well-behaved suburbs of space-time. Here at Skinwalker Ranch, he was in the wild, lawless frontier, and the laws were being written by someone or something else entirely. Chapter 4. The night of the grand experiment was electric with tension. 2 distinct teams operated in parallel, a half-mile apart, linked by encrypted radio channels. At the Triangle, Eris, Dragon, and Preston's primary drone crew prepped the 600 drone swarm. In the east, Field Hayes was stationed with the remaining 400 drones and another launch crew. Caleb McEwen was with Eris's team, his new FPV drone ready for flight. Jim Royston stood by with his LiDAR drone awaiting the signal to begin his transect. The sky was a moonless obsidian canvas, perfect for the coming light show. But as the final preparations were being made, it happened again. Contact! The call came from one of Dragon's perimeter guards, his voice sharp over the radio. Same as last time, high west, moving east. Eris's head snapped up. A brilliant point of light was gliding silently across the sky, tracing the exact path of the UAP from the previous experiment. It flared brightly as it passed over the mesa, then vanished. A moment later, Preston swore into his headset, "I'm losing them. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. I just lost 168 drones from the network." Hayes' voice crackled from the east field, laced with static, losing action here too. Over 200 drones, just pepped off the grid. "It's a repeat," Eris said, his stomach tightening. "The UAP appears and our communication systems go down. It's only get 200 connected, and stable," came the reply from the east field. "The other 200 are bricks." "It's not a blanket jamming field," Eris realized aloud. "It's targeted." It allowed exactly 200 drones to connect in the east field. That's the same number that launched from the Triangle last time. Is that significant? Is it communicating through numbers? "No time to figure that out now," Dragon said. "We're burning daylight. Or moonlight. We launch with what we have Hayes declared over the radio. 600 at the Triangle, 200 at the east field. All systems prepare for simultaneous launch. Caleb, get ready. Jim, prepare for your transect." A countdown began relayed between the 2 sites. A wave of adrenaline washed over Eris. This was it. 3, 2, 1, launch! At both locations, rockets ignited, screaming into the night. Seconds later, the drones lifted off a total of 800 points of light, rising in eerie unison. For 30 glorious seconds, it worked. The drones formed their initial formations, a massive hollow cylinder of light over the east field and 2 parallel lines over the Triangle. The sight was magnificent, a piece of futuristic art painted on the canvas of the night. Then the chaos began. "They're dropping!" Preston yelled. "We're raining drones!" The same horrifying phenomenon as before, but on a larger scale. Drones at both sites began to tumble from the sky, their lights extinguishing as they hit the ground. The perfect formations began to decay, lights winking out like dying stars. "Caleb, go now," Eris commanded. Caleb's FPV drone shot into the air, its camera feed appearing on Eris's monitor. He flew towards the disintegrating lines of light, weaving through the falling debris. Jim launched, the LiDAR Hayes radioed. From the edge of the field, the heavy-duty LiDAR drone lifted off, beginning its slow, methodical flight path towards the east field, its invisible lasers scanning the volume of air between the 2 anomalous zones. On the ground, it was mayhem. Drones were falling everywhere, forcing the team to duck for cover under their equipment tents. One spiraled down and landed still buzzing inside the tent with Hayes' team, who had to physically swat it to the ground. The rocket's Dragon shouted. The igniters blew, both of them. Eris looked over at the launch pads. Both rockets at both sites had failed to launch a second time, their ignition systems inexplicably shorting out at the exact same moment. The system was fighting back, and it was using every tool at its disposal. It was disabling their propulsion, their communication, their navigation. It was a total system shutdown. Through it all, Caleb flew on his camera, relaying the surreal images of the dying swarm. And Jim's LiDAR drone continued its lonely journey, a silent witness mapping the invisible battlefield. Then from the east field, Hayes' frantic voice cut through the noise. The rocket from the first rocket, it just vanished. Eris toggled his monitor to the feed from the high-speed camera in the east field. He watched the replay. The rocket they had launched at the start of the experiment was streaking upwards. Then, for a dozen frames, a fraction of a second, in real time, it simply disappeared. It didn't explode. It didn't fade. The streak of light was there, and then it was gone, only to reappear a moment later further along its trajectory. It passed behind something Eris breathed, something that isn't visible. He switched to the camera at the triangle. The view was looking back over the swarm. He could see the cylinder of light from the east field in the distance, and he saw Caleb's FPV drone flying towards it. He watched mesmerized as the small, dark shape of the FPV drone reached the same approximate area in the sky and vanished. Like the rocket, it was gone for a split second, then reappeared. "My God," Eris whispered. He zoomed in on the replay, manipulating the contrast. As he did, something flashed on the screen. It was impossibly fast. A streak of light emerging from the side of the mesa, arcing through the sky, and then vanishing back into the rock face. "Did you see that he yelled to Dragon?" "I saw it." They replayed it again and again. It was undeniable. At the exact moment their rocket and drone had temporarily disappeared from view, something had shot out of the mesa and returned. It was at a spot the team had nicknamed the Outpoint, the very location where a UAP had been filmed exiting the mesa months earlier. The pieces slammed together in Eris's mind with the force of a physical blow. "It's a doorway," he said, his voice trembling with the enormity of the realization. "It's not a solid object in the mesa. It's a gateway, a stable wormhole. The triangle and the east field are the endpoints, the apertures. The 30-foot altitude is the event horizon. When our devices crossed it, they weren't just passing behind something invisible. They were briefly passing through it into whatever's on the other side." The GPS data suddenly made perfect sense. The drones in the triangle were in the east field for a few seconds because the 2 points had been momentarily spatially connected. The 1.6 gigahertz signal wasn't coming from everywhere. It was coming through the gateway, echoing in our dimension. The invisible swarming lights, the equipment failures, the UAPs, they were all related to the activity of this gateway. Maybe they were probes from the other side. Maybe they were the gateway's immune system attacking their intrusive technology. As the last of the drones fell from the sky, leaving a profound and sudden silence, Jim Royston's voice came over the radio, calm and steady. "LiDAR scan is complete. I'm bringing the bird home. You guys, you're going to want to see this." They gathered in the command center, the wreckage of the experiment strewn across the fields outside. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt electronics. Jim processed the LiDAR data, and a 3D point cloud image began to form on the main screen. It showed the terrain of the ranch, the mesa, the triangle, and suspended in the air between them was the anomaly. It was not a cone. The previous scan had only captured a part of it. The full scan revealed its true shape. It was a perfect, massive, shimmering tube of distorted space, connecting the triangle directly to the endpoint in the east field. It was a tunnel through the fabric of reality itself. The UAP we saw entering and exiting the mesa, it was just flying down the hallway, Hayes said in awe. Eris stared at the image, his scientific mind completely and utterly broken and then rebuilt into something new. They had not come here and discovered a phenomenon. They had stumbled upon a piece of transport infrastructure. On interstellar, or perhaps interdimensional highway, and they were standing right in the middle of it. Dragon looked from the screen to the dark shape of the mesa outside the window. So he set his voice a low rumble. "The thing we're trying to drill into isn't a ship, it's the damn power station." A klaxon suddenly blared through the command center. An alarm. "What is that?" Hayes demanded. Eric spun around in his chair, his face pale. "It's a seismic alert. From the sensors we placed around the drilling site, there's a massive energy surge coming from inside the mesa. The dome-shaped object, it's powering up." On the screen, the 3D image of the wormhole began to glow the points of light, shifting from cool blue to a violent, angry red. The 1.6 gigahertz signal screamed from the speakers, no longer a curious chirp, but a deafening, continuous roar. The machine they had been studying was now studying them back, and it seemed it didn't like what it saw. Part 3. The Swarm is Awake, Chapter 5. The klaxon shriek was instantly drowned out by a sound that was not heard but felt a deep, resonant hum that vibrated up through the concrete floor of the command center and into their bones. The lights flickered, and the bank of monitors displaying the LiDAR image dissolved into a cascade of digital snow. What was the Richter reading Hayes shouted over the din, grabbing the edge of a console to steady himself as the trailers shuddered? "It's not an earthquake," Eric yelled back, his face a mask of terror and exhilaration. The seismometers are reading a coherent, structured vibration. "It's not tectonic slippage, it's a machine spinning up to speed. The energy output is exponential." Dragon didn't wait for analysis. His years in combat zones had hardwired his instincts for survival. Out, everybody out now, he bellowed his voice, cutting through the panic. "This tin can is not rated for whatever the hell this is. Move." He began herding the technicians toward the door, but Eris remained frozen, his eyes locked on a single ruggedized tablet in his hands, the only device still functioning hard-lined directly to the spectrum analyzer. No, wait, the signal, the structure is changing. It's not just noise, it's becoming more complex. It's data. I have to record this. You can record it from the afterlife. Doc Dragon grabbed Eris by the arm, his grip like a steel vise, and hauled him bodily towards the exit. Data is no good if you're a radioactive ghost. They stumbled out into the cold night air, and the world was wrong. The ground beneath their feet was vibrating with the mesa's deep thrum. The air itself felt thick, charged with an incredible static potential that made the hair on their arms stand on end and caused blue sparks of Street Elmo's fire to dance along the metal railings of the command center steps. Above them, the stars seemed to warp and twist as if viewed through a lens of shifting water. Then came the pulse. It wasn't light or sound. It was a silent, visible wave of pure spatial distortion that erupted from the direction of the invisible wormhole. Eris saw it coming, a ripple in reality that shimmered across the desert floor, making the scrub, brush, and rocks momentarily appear to flatten and stretch. He had a brief, nauseating sensation of vertigo, a feeling of his own physical coordinates being squeezed and pulled apart. The wave washed over them in an instant. For a heartbeat, the world lost its coherence. The mesa seemed to loom impossibly close its rock face, transparent, revealing a glowing geometric core of unimaginable complexity. Then reality snapped back into place, leaving them dizzy and gasping. Every digital watch on their wrists had reset to 0000000. A frantic shout crackled over Dragon's radio. It was Thomas, the drilling foreman, who had remained at the rig to secure it. "Dragon, you there? What in God's name is happening? The borehole." "It's... Oh my God." The transmission ended in a crash of static and a roar of escaping pressure. From their vantage point, they saw a plume of rock dust and vapor erupt from the mouth of the borehole at the base of the mesa. A moment later, something long and metallic shot out of the hole, propelled by an unimaginable force. It was the entire 480-foot drill string they had lost. It flew through the air like a colossal javelin, trailing sparks, and slammed into the side of the multi-ton drilling rig, punching through the steel housing of the engine block with a sickening shriek of tearing metal. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The ground fell still. The oppressive hum from the mesa faded into silence. The static charge in the air dissipated. On Eris's tablet, the 1.6 gigahertz signal dropped from its deafening roar back to its familiar intermittent chirp. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a heavy, menacing quiet, the silence of a predator that had just demonstrated its strength. The team stood in stunned silence, staring at the impaled drilling rig, a monument to their hubris. They had come here with their best technology to probe a mystery, and the mystery had contemptuously thrown their tools back in their faces. Dragon was the first to speak his voice, a low growl. He looked at Eris, whose face was illuminated by the glow of the tablet. "You threw your rock at the beehive, Doctor. You wanted to see how it would respond. Well, now the whole damn swarm is awake." Eris didn't look up. He was tracing the complex waveforms that had been captured during the energy surge. The fear, the adrenaline, the near-death experience, all of it was secondary to the patterns now unfolding before his eyes. It wasn't a chaotic burst of energy. It was modulated, structured. It contained layers of information so dense it would take their supercomputers years to decrypt. He zoomed in on a specific packet of data that repeated itself at the very peak of the transmission. He ran a basic decryption algorithm, a simple search for mathematical constants, and then he saw it. A string of numbers that made the blood drain from his face. It was the precise value of the fine structure constant, followed by the atomic mass of hydrogen, followed by a graphical representation of a DNA helix. It was a calling card, An answer to a question they hadn't even known how to ask. He finally looked up from the tablet, his eyes wide with a terror far deeper than the mere threat of physical destruction. He looked past Dragon, past the wrecked rig, towards the silent, brooding mesa. That wasn't an attack, Eris whispered, his voice trembling. It wasn't a warning flare, it was a broadcast. It focused all that energy into a single, directed, interstellar transmission. Hayes stared at him, uncomprehending. A transmission? To who? To what? I don't know, Eris said, the tablet shaking in his hand. But it just told someone or something that we're here. It just rang the dinner bell. Chapter 6. The silence that followed Eris's pronouncement was more terrifying than the chaos that had preceded it. The phrase rang, the dinner bell hung in the cold, still air, painting a vivid, horrifying picture in everyone's mind. They were no longer observers. They were bait. Dragon's tactical mind took over, overriding the shock. Nobody moves, he commanded, his voice a low, steady anchor in the sea of their fear. He keyed his radio. All stations, this is Dragon. Sound off. Status report now. One by one, the shaken voices of his security team checked in from their perimeter posts. All were accounted for, though disoriented and spooked. The team from the East Field, led by Hayes, reported in as well. They were safe, having witnessed the destruction at the drill site from a distance. The only one unaccounted for was Thomas. I'm going to the rig, Dragon announced, grabbing a high-powered flashlight from a vehicle. Eric, get the command center's auxiliary power running. I want every damn camera on this ranch operational 5 minutes ago. Hayes, get your team back here on the double. Eris, you're with me. Eris was still staring at the mesa, the implications of the broadcast swirling in his mind. Yes, you, Dragon said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You're the one who understands what we're dealing with on a physics level. I need to know if that site is radioactive, electromagnetically charged, or about to fold in on itself. You're my Geiger counter. As they approached the wrecked drill site in an ATV, the scene was one of industrial carnage. The massive drill string had pierced the rig with such force that it had lifted one side of the multi-ton machine off its tracks. Steam hissed from the ruptured engine block. The air smelled of hot metal and ozone. Eris scanned the area with a tri-field meter. No residual EM fields of significance, no ionizing radiation above background levels. Whatever energy it used, it was clean and temporary. They found Thomas huddled behind the rig's massive tires, covered in dust, but miraculously unharmed. He was a man in deep shock, muttering about the ground, shaking, and the hole screaming at him. Dragon's medics took him back to the command center for evaluation. By the time they returned, the command center was a hive of controlled activity. Eric had the systems back online. The main screen now showed a grid of dozens of camera feeds from all over the ranch, the homesteads, the triangle, the perimeter fences. Hayes and his team had returned their faces grim. Eris projected the data from his tablet onto the main screen. This is what I intercepted, he began, his voice strained. He pointed to the decoded data packets, the fine structure constant, the spectral line of hydrogen, a visual representation of a double helix. This isn't a random burst of energy. This is a primer. A message designed to be universally understood by any intelligent life that has a basic grasp of physics and biology. It's the Arecibo message in reverse. Hayes breathed, recognizing the format. We sent a similar primer out into space in the 70s. This is a reply, but not to us. Exactly, Eris agreed. This gateway, this machine, has been dormant or operating at a low level for who knows how long. Our activities, our focused radio frequencies from the drones, our drilling, our rockets, we annoyed it. We were like children tapping on the glass of a terrarium. And in response, it didn't just tap back. It picked up a megaphone and broadcast our existence to the entire neighborhood. Billy Dragon, who had been listening intently, cut to the chase. What does that mean tactically? Who did it call? That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, Eris said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. The transmission was highly directional. It wasn't a broad shout, it was a tight beam. Eric, can you triangulate the vector based on the slight time delay I got between the different antennas? Eric's fingers flew across his keyboard. A star chart appeared on one of the screens. After a moment, a line extended from their position on Earth out into the cosmos. It passed through the constellations of Lyra and Cygnus, pointing towards a seemingly unremarkable patch of dark space. It's aimed at nothing, Hayes said, puzzled. No major star systems, no nebulae, just the void. Not nothing, Eris corrected his voice barely a whisper as he cross-referenced the coordinates with a deep space survey. He zoomed in on the target area, the image resolving into a faint, fuzzy smudge. It's pointed at a globular cluster, a dense, ancient swarm of millions of stars just outside our own galaxy. The room fell silent. The scale of what they were dealing with had just expanded by a factor of 1,000,000. But the distance, Hayes stammered, that cluster is over 25000 light years away. Even if the signal traveled instantly through this wormhole network, a reply would take. You're assuming the other end of the gateway is in our physical space-time, Eris interrupted. What if it's not? What if this machine doesn't just bend space, but time as well? What if the reply is already on its way? As if on cue, a new alert chimed from Eric's console. It wasn't a seismic alarm. What is it, Dragon demanded? It's the VLA. Eric set his eyes wide. He pointed to a live feed from the Very Large Array, the massive radio telescope in New Mexico. They've just issued a global alert. They're detecting a powerful, coherent radio signal. It's not natural, it's artificial. Where is it coming from? Eris asked, his heart pounding. Eric brought up another star chart, plotting the source of the new signal. It's not from the globular cluster, he said. It's much, much closer. It's coming from the orbit of Saturn. A cold collective dread filled the command center. The dinner bell had been rung, and something was already at the table. Chapter 7. The Saturn revelation landed in the command center with the force of a physical impact. For a moment, nobody spoke. The distant, almost philosophical threat of a 25,000 light-year signal was one thing. A direct, active response from within their own solar system was another entirely. It was the difference between seeing a wolf's tracks in the snow and finding the wolf itself breathing on your doorstep. That's impossible. Hayes was the first to speak his voice, a strained whisper. He was an astrophysicist. Saturn was his backyard. There's nothing out there. Cassini surveyed the entire system for 13 years. We've mapped every moon, every Shepherd satellite, every significant rock in the rings. There is no transmitter. There is now, Eric said grimly, his fingers flying as he pulled in the raw data from the VLA's public server. The signal is strong, and it's not a reflection or a natural magnetospheric emission. It's complex, modulated. It's broadcasting on a carrier wave that's an exact harmonic of our 1.6 gigahertz signal. It's an answer. Dragon's focus was immediate and practical. Lockdown, he said, his voice cutting through the scientific debate. He keyed his comms unit, bypassing the main channels for a direct encrypted link. Initiate Protocol Omega. Full lockdown. No one in or out without my direct authorization. Scramble air assets. I want a 24/7 drone patrol on the perimeter, thermal, and multispectral. I want every sensor on this property slave to my station. A mouse can't fart without me knowing about it. He turned to face the stunned scientists. Protocol Omega was a contingency so extreme they had only ever discussed it in theoretical terms. It effectively turned the 512-acre ranch into a self-contained military base. Is that really necessary? Hayes started to ask, but Dragon silenced him with a glare. We have an unknown intelligence with unknown capabilities that has just parked itself in our solar system and is now talking directly to a potential weapon of mass destruction buried in that mountain. Dragon stated, his voice dangerously calm. Yes, I think it's necessary. Eric, get me a secure line to the benefactor. Now, the benefactor was the project's owner, a shadowy billionaire whose fascination with the paranormal was matched only by his obsession with secrecy. He had provided the near-limitless funding, but his involvement was always remote, filtered through layers of intermediaries. A direct call from Dragon meant the situation had gone critical. While Dragon moved to a secure communications room, Eris and Hayes huddled with Eric around the main console, trying to make sense of the Saturn signal. It's not just a beacon, Eris murmured, watching the waterfall display of the demodulated signal. It was a cascade of intricate patterns, nested symmetries, and data packets of incredible density. It's a conversation. Look. He pointed to the screen. Here's our 1.6 signal from the Mesa, the baseline chirp. And here he indicated a new interlaced signal is the reply from Saturn. They're synchronizing. The two signals, one originating from the Utah desert and the other from nearly 1 billion miles away, were weaving around each other in a complex rhythmic dance. The Saturn signal would pulse, and in the microsecond delay that followed the Mesa signal would alter its own frequency as if in acknowledgement. Then the Mesa would pulse, and the Saturn signal would respond in kind. It's a digital handshake, Eric confirmed, his earlier fear being replaced by a kind of awestruck horror. They're negotiating a connection protocol, like two computers trying to agree on a baud rate before a data transfer. What kind of data? Hayes asked. Something big, Eris replied, his mind reeling. This handshake is establishing parameters for a massive bandwidth, orders of magnitude greater than the entire internet. They're not getting ready to send a message. They're preparing to open a fire hose. As he spoke, the ranch itself seemed to respond. The background hum, which had faded after the pulse, slowly began to return, but it was different now. It was a higher pitch, a more complex tone. On the perimeter, camera feeds small shimmering heat distortions began to appear in the air at random locations like invisible campfires. "What are those?" Hayes asked, pointing to a monitor showing a field near Homestead 2. A shimmering orb-like heat signature was hovering a few feet off the ground. "We're seeing them pop up all over." Dragon's voice came over the intercom from the comms room. "My patrols are reporting them. They're electromagnetically active. They're interfering with our radios." The gateway is becoming unstable, Eris realized. Or not unstable, more active. The handshake is causing resonance effects. "It's like the walls of the tunnel are vibrating, and we're seeing the harmonics leak through into our space." Dragon re-entered the room, his face set like stone. "The benefactor has been briefed," he said. "He's concerned." He paused. "He's also activating some assets. He wants optical confirmation of the Saturn transmitter." "The Hubble James Webb?" Hayes asked. "Something a little more proprietary," Dragon said cryptically. "A military space-based observatory that officially doesn't exist. We should have imagery within the hour." The hour that followed was the longest of their lives. They watched the two signals weave their intricate dance, a silent conversation between worlds. They watched the camera feeds as more and more of the shimmering, heat-distorting orbs appeared across the ranch, their numbers growing from a few dozen to hundreds. They were drifting slowly, aimlessly, like jellyfish in an invisible current, their presence causing static to bleed across the video feeds. Then Eric's console chimed with an incoming encrypted file. "This is it," he said, his hands trembling slightly as he typed in the decryption keys, imagery from Sky Eye. A black and white, incredibly high-resolution image filled the main screen. It was the limb of Saturn, its majestic rings cutting a sharp line across the starfield. And there, nestled in the Cassini division, a gap in the rings, was an object. It was not a moon. It was not an asteroid. It was a construct of impossible geometry. It seemed to defy Euclidean space, its angles sharp and unnatural, its surface a mosaic of shifting crystalline patterns. It was vast, easily the size of a terrestrial city, yet it seemed to absorb all light, making it a hole in the fabric of space rather than a solid object. And from its core, a single impossibly thin antenna was pointed directly at Earth. "My God," Hayes whispered, all the scientific detachment gone from his voice. "It's been waiting. It must have been dormant." Waiting for a wake-up call, Eris finished his eyes, tracing the alien architecture. "And we provided it. We were the alarm clock." He looked back at the signal display at the relentless, perfect synchronization between the mesa and the alien ship. The handshake was almost complete. The final parameters were being set. He could feel it in the vibrations running through the floor and the oppressive electric quality of the air. "It's not just preparing to send data," Eris said, a terrible final certainty dawning on him. "Data can be transmitted. This is different. A connection protocol of this complexity with this much energy. They're not opening a communication channel." He turned to face the others, his face pale. "They're opening the door." Part 4, The Door Opens, Chapter 8. Eris's words fell into a void of stunned silence. Opening the door was no longer a metaphor. It was a statement of literal, imminent, and terrifying fact. The proof came a moment later. On the main console, the two intertwining signals, one from the mesa, one from the city-sized artifact at Saturn, suddenly snapped into perfect, rigid alignment. The complex dance of the handshake was over. They were now a single unified signal, a carrier wave of unimaginable power and stability. "Connection established," Eric whispered, his voice trembling. "Protocol negotiated. Bandwidth is. It's infinite. The math breaks down. It's not a definable value." Simultaneously, the high-pitched hum permeating the ranch intensified, rising in frequency until it was a piercing, glass-vibrating shriek that forced everyone to clamp their hands over their ears. The hundreds of shimmering orb-like distortions that had been drifting across the property suddenly coalesced. They swarmed from every corner of the 512 acres, converging on the two focal points, the triangle and the east field endpoint. On the LiDAR display, which had rebooted the ghostly image of the wormhole between the 2 points, flared into brilliant, solid-looking reality. It was no longer an invisible structure. The coalescing orbs were illuminating it from within, turning the tunnel of distorted space-time into a blazing corridor of white-hot energy that pulsed in time with the unified signal. "It's a full-power activation," Hayes yelled over the noise, his face illuminated by the monitor's glare. "They're stabilizing the terminus points." Dragon was already shouting orders into his comms. All security teams pull back to the command center. Full defensive perimeter. I want every weapon hot. We are no longer an observation post. We are a frontline position. Repeat, we are on the front line. The ground began to shake again, not with the deep hum of a machine, but with the violent wrenching tremors of something being physically torn apart. A new alert flashed on Eric's console, this one from a series of high-precision GPS sensors placed around the mesa. Geospatial displacement, Eric cried out. The mesa itself is moving. The entire rock formation is shifting, twisting. The endpoint is dilating. On the camera feed aimed at the east field, they watched in horror as the rock face of the mesa began to shimmer and distort. The stone seemed to lose its solidity, becoming a translucent, gelatinous mass. At the center of the distortion, at the exact point where UAPs had been seen to enter a circle of absolute blackness, began to form, expanding like a dilating pupil. It was not a shadow, it was a hole in the world. The door Eris breathed his scientific curiosity, now completely eclipsed by a primal instinctual terror. From the blackness, something emerged. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a creature in any recognizable sense. It was a wave of shimmering fractal light, a cascade of impossible geometry that poured from the opening like a liquid. It flowed out onto the desert floor, and where it touched the ground, reality itself began to unravel. The rocks and scrub brush it washed over didn't burn or dissolve. They were rewritten. Sandstone twisted into crystalline structures that reflected unseen colors. Sagebrush bushes blossomed into metallic tree-like growths that hummed with a low energy. The fractal wave surged forward, expanding rapidly, its leading edge, a chaotic storm of transformation. It's a von Neumann probe haze stammered his mind, clinging to a theoretical concept to make sense of the impossible. Self-replicating. It's converting our matter into its matter. It's terraforming. It's not terraforming, Dragon growled, watching the wave on the monitors as it began to advance towards the command center's location. It's consuming. Eric, what's the speed of that thing? Advancing at 30 meters per second. Eric reported, his voice shaking. And it's accelerating. We have less than 3 minutes, Dragon calculated aloud. He turned to Eris. Doctor, you said this was a machine. Is there any way to shut it down? Eris's mind raced, adrenaline cutting through the fear. Shut it down, how they were insects trying to shut down a star. But then an image flashed in his memory, his father Elias, his face pale and haunted, staring into the middle distance. He remembered a rare cryptic conversation from his childhood. His father, in a moment of unguarded despair, had spoken of the thing in the mesa, of the sound it made, the unholy music. He'd called it a resonant frequency, a keynote that held it all together. At the time, Eris had dismissed it as the ramblings of a broken mind. But now, the signal, Eris said, grabbing a stunned Eric by the shoulder, the 1.6 gigahertz frequency. It's not just a communication channel. It's the keynote, it's the resonant frequency that stabilizes the wormhole. If we can disrupt it, introduce a countersignal, we might be able to cause the connection to collapse. Hal Hayes demanded, we have nothing that can broadcast with enough power to override that. We do. Eris set his eyes wild with a desperate, brilliant idea. He pointed towards the window at the wrecked, impaled drilling rig, the rig's beacon transmitter. It's shielded, it has its own power source, and it's currently embedded deep inside a multi-ton steel engine block. It's a crude directional antenna pointed right at the mesa's core. Dragon caught on instantly. You want to turn the drill into a frequency weapon. We can't just jam it, Eris explained already, scribbling equations on a whiteboard. We need to broadcast a signal that's precisely out of phase with the primary carrier wave. Destructive interference. It would be like pushing a child on a swing at the wrong moment. It would disrupt the rhythm, overload the stabilizing mechanism, and the gateway should theoretically collapse. Theoretically, Dragon repeated his expression, grim. And if the theory's wrong, then we will have very effectively poked the god of this universe in the eye with a sharp stick, Eris admitted. The consuming, reality-altering wave was now less than a kilometer away. They could see it from the command center windows, a shimmering, rolling tide of alien transformation. We have one shot at this, Dragon declared. Eric, can you modify the beacon's broadcast frequency from here? I can try, Eric said, his hands a blur on the keyboard. If I can hack its firmware, yes, I'm in. Eris, I need the exact phase-shifted frequency. Now, Eris finished his calculations. Here, transmit this and pray. As Eric typed in the final command, a new player entered the game. The alien construct at Saturn, silent until now, reacted. The single thin antenna retracted and a new, much larger aperture opened on its non-Euclidean surface. From it, a beam of pure coherent energy shot across the solar system at the speed of light. "Incoming energy," Hayes yelled, watching his long-range sensors. "It's not a radio wave, it's a particle beam. It's aimed directly at the mesa. It's trying to reinforce the gateway." "Oh, too late," Dragon growled. "Eric now." Eric hit onto her. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The piercing shriek from the mesa continued. The consuming wave rolled forward. Then, the note changed. A discordant, ugly element entered the pure tone, a grinding, stuttering beat like a skipping record. On the LiDAR display, the brilliant white tunnel of the wormhole flickered violently, turning a sick, chaotic yellow. The particle beam from Saturn struck the mesa, and instead of reinforcing the gateway, the energy unable to enter the now unstable tunnel splashed across the exterior of the rock face in a silent, cataclysmic explosion of light that illuminated the entire valley like a new dawn. The shriek from the mesa rose to an impossible tearing crescendo, and then with a final deafening crack that shattered every window in the command center, it stopped. The ground fell silent. The consuming wave halted its advance, its shimmering fractal light dissolving into a cloud of gray, inert dust. The hole in the side of the mesa collapsed the rock face, snapping back into its solid, familiar form. The door was closed. They had done it. They had survived. But as they stood there gasping in the sudden ringing silence, a new alarm began to chime softly from Eric's console. It wasn't seismic. It wasn't radio. It was a proximity alert from one of Dragon's perimeter drones. Dragon Eric said, his voice a choked whisper. The drone on the western ridge, its camera is seeing something. He brought the feed up on the main screen. The camera was looking down from a high vantage point. In the center of the frame, standing on the ridge, silhouetted against the pre-dawn glow, was a figure. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its form vaguely humanoid, but utterly alien. It was not a projection or an energy orb, it was a physical being. And as they watched it, turned its head slowly, its featureless face looking directly at the camera, directly at them. The door had closed, but something had gotten through. The image on the screen was stark silent and absolute. The command center, which seconds before had been a cacophony of alarms and shouting, was now held in a grip of shocked silence. The victory, the relief of having closed the gateway evaporated in an instant. They had slammed the door on an invading army only to find one of its soldiers already inside the house. For a full minute, the figure on the ridge remained perfectly still. It was a silhouette against the first hints of dawn, a black cutout of a thing that had no right to exist. It stood at least 8 feet tall, with a slender, elongated torso and limbs that seemed to have one too many joints. Its head was a smooth, ovoid shape atop a long, thin neck. There were no discernible features, yet the way it was angled felt unmistakably like observation. It was watching the ranch. It was watching them. Dragon was the first to break the spell. His response was not panic, but a cold, focused calm that settled over him like a shroud. "Hold positions," he said into his comms, his voice a low, steady growl. "All teams, I repeat, hold your positions. Do not, I say again, do not engage. This is a containment situation, not an assault. I want eyes on weapons ready, but nobody fires without my direct command." He turned to Eric. "Give me a multispectral analysis of that thing. Now, I want to know what it's made of, what it's emitting, and if it's even real." Eric's hands, which had been frozen over his keyboard, began to move again, the familiar clatter, a small comfort in the profound strangeness of the moment. He tasked the perimeter drone to switch through its sensor packages. "Thermal is." "Bizarre," Eric reported, his voice tight. "It's showing a core temperature significantly below ambient. It's like a column of cold air colder than the surrounding desert night. There's a faint heat signature at the joints, if that's what they are, but the main body is a heat sink. It's not biological, as we understand it," Eris murmured, staring at the screen. "A creature of flesh and blood would radiate heat. This thing was absorbing it. Maybe some kind of silicon-based life, or a biomechanical construct." "Multispectral is even weirder," Eric continued, pulling up more data. "It's absorbing almost all light from near-infrared up through the high ultraviolet. That's why it looks so perfectly black. It's not a color, it's an absence of reflection, like a patch of the Vanablack, but it's a living thing. It's a stealth organism," Dragon concluded grimly, "designed for low observability. It's a scout, an infiltrator." He keyed his comms again. "Raptor team, you have your orders." "Move to observation point, Charlie. I want a live visual, but stay out of sight. I don't want it to know you're there." As if it had heard him, the figure on the ridge moved. It didn't walk or run. It flowed. One moment it was standing still, the next it was gliding down the rocky slope with an unnatural smoothness, its long limbs bending at impossible angles to accommodate the terrain. It didn't seem to touch the ground so much as hover a millimeter above it, propelled by some unseen force. It moved with a terrifying grace and an undeniable purpose. "Where is it going?" Hayes asked, his voice hushed. The triangle heiress answered instantly, a dawning horror in his eyes. "Of course, it's going to the terminus point." He pointed to another monitor which showed a camera feed from the triangle itself. The ground there was still coated in the fine gray inert dust left behind by the consuming fractal wave. As the distant figure of the visitor, the name instantly crystallizing in all their minds, approached, the dust began to react. A faint phosphorescent blue light started to emanate from the ground, spreading outwards from the center of the triangle. The inert matter was reawakening, responding to the proximity of its master. That dust? It's not dead matter, Hayes realized. It's dormant technology. Nanites. A sea of them waiting for a command signal. And the visitor is the command signal. Eris finished. The visitor reached the edge of the triangle and glided into its center. The blue glow of the dust intensified, rising from the ground like a luminous fog that swirled around the creature's thin legs. The air in the command center crackled as the spectrum analyzer shrieked back to life. The 1.6 gigahertz signal was back. But it was transformed. It was no longer the mechanical chirp of the gateway, nor the chaotic roar of the energy surge. This was a new sound, a signal of breathtaking complexity and beauty. It was a soft, melodic cascade of tones that sounded less like a radio broadcast and more like a symphony played on alien instruments. It was structured, intelligent, and impossibly ancient. Eris listened mesmerized. This wasn't a machine's voice, it was a mind's voice. They were listening to the visitor think. In the center of the glowing fog, the visitor raised one of its impossibly long arms. The swirling dust motes responded instantly. They began to rise from the ground, not in a chaotic cloud, but in ordered streams flowing together, weaving themselves into intricate geometric patterns in the air. Crystalline lattices bloomed and dissolved. Complex fractal shapes built themselves out of nothing and then folded back in on themselves. The visitor was building something from the raw converted matter of their world. Dragon watched the process on the screen, his tactical mind assessing the threat. "It's constructing," he said, "an antenna, a weapon, a beacon." He had a critical choice to make. Intervene now while the visitor was occupied, or wait and risk it, completing a device with unknown capabilities. The memory of the consuming wave was still fresh in his mind. He would not let that happen again. He raised his comms unit to his lips. "Raptor 1, do you have a clear shot?" "Affirmative, Dragon," the sniper's comm voice came back. "Target is stationary, we have a solid lock." "On my mark," Dragon said, his thumb hovering over the transmit button. But before he could give the order, Hayes cried out from his station. "Dragon, wait, look at the long-range..." He pointed to the screen displaying the feed from the Sky Eye Observatory. The image of the city-sized construct at Saturn was still there, but it was changing. The main antenna was retracting. A different part of the non-Euclidean structure was rotating forward, a section that glowed with a fierce internal energy. It looked less like a communications dish and more like the barrel of a cannon. "It's reconfiguring," Hayes said, his voice trembling. "It's shifting from a communications posture to something else. An offensive stance? It's waiting. It's waiting for a signal from the visitor." Dragon's hand froze. The dilemma was now horribly clear. If they attacked the visitor, it might trigger a retaliatory strike from the ship at Saturn, a strike they could not possibly survive. If they did nothing, the visitor would complete its device and send a signal anyway, likely initiating the very same attack. They were caught in a tactical checkmate where every possible move led to disaster. Eris stared at the image of the visitor weaving its creation from the dust of his world. He remembered the decoded message from the gateway, the constants of physics, the helix of life. It was a message of intelligence. Was this creature, this silent, graceful architect, truly just a mindless soldier, or was it trying to do something else? "Don't shoot, Eris," said his voice quiet but firm. "Not yet. It's building a communications device. That means it wants to talk. Let's see what it has to say." Dragon looked from Eris's pleading face to the monitor showing the alien weapon charging 1 billion miles away, and then to the visitor serenely constructing its impossible machine in the heart of his ranch. Every instinct he had screamed at him to eliminate the threat. But Eris was right. They were outmatched in every conceivable way. Their only hope, their only chance was that this was not an act of war, but the beginning of a conversation. A conversation that would decide the fate of their entire world. Chapter 10, The Message. The silence in the command center stretched taut as a piano wire. Every eye was locked on a different monitor, each displaying a unique facet of their impossible predicament, the silent black visitor weaving its device from phosphorescent dust. The grim tactical view from a sniper's scope, a crosshair centered on the visitor's ovoid head. The cold astronomical image of the weapon at Saturn, a glowing aperture aimed at their planet. It was a standoff on a scale that defied human history. Dragon's thumb remained a millimeter from the transmit button on his comms. His face was a mask of conflict, his tactical training warring with the sheer overwhelming unknown. Every fiber of his being screamed that the creature in the triangle was a beachhead, a foothold for an invasion that they had for the moment narrowly averted. To allow it to complete its work was an act of strategic insanity. Raptor 1, what's your status? Dragon's voice was a low growl, a final check before the irrevocable decision. Still have the shot, the sniper replied, his voice preternaturally calm. Wind is negligible. It's a statue dragon. I can't miss. Whole Dragon commanded the single word costing him more than any order he had ever given. He looked at Eris, his eyes hard. You better be right about this, Doc. Because if you're wrong, I told you so, isn't going to mean much when this whole valley is a smoking crater. Eris could only nod his own heart hammering against his ribs. He felt a strange connection to the creature in the field. He had been the one to decipher its language of physics, the one who understood the keynote of its technology. He felt illogically that he was the only one who could understand its intent. On the monitor, the visitor's work was nearing completion. The streams of nanites had woven themselves into a crystalline spire that now stood 10 feet tall. It was a thing of breathtaking alien beauty, a lattice of interlocking geometric shapes that seemed to shift and reconfigure as they watched. It pulsed with a soft internal blue light, in perfect sync with the melodic tones of the visitor's telepathic broadcast. Then the visitor stepped back. It lowered its long, slender arms. The construction was complete. It stood before the spire for a moment, a silent architect before its creation. Then it raised both arms to the sky. The melodic signal flooding the command center instantly intensified. The crystalline spire responded, its blue light flaring to a brilliant white. A beam of focused, coherent energy visible even on the standard cameras shot from the tip of the spire directly upwards into the dawn sky. It's transmitting. Hayes yelled, diving for his console. Is it aimed at Saturn? No, Eris said, his eyes wide. The beam isn't energy in the conventional sense. It's something else. Look at the spectrum. The beam wasn't broadcasting on a single frequency. It was broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously, from low-end radio waves up through gamma rays, yet somehow without releasing any destructive energy. It was a pure information carrier. It's not aimed at Saturn, Eris repeated, a wild realization dawning. It's aimed at us, at our technology. It's a broadcast infection, a software update. All at once, every screen in the command center flickered. Lines of alien code strings, of geometric symbols and complex mathematical equations cascaded across the monitors, overriding their own operating systems. Their firewalls, their encryption, their defenses, all were bypassed in a nanosecond. They were being hacked by a god. Then the true nature of the message began. It wasn't code, it wasn't language. It was a direct conceptual data transfer, a flood of pure meaning that bypassed their senses and poured directly into their consciousness. Eris cried out and staggered back, clutching his head. Hayes collapsed into his chair, his eyes wide with unseeing shock. Eric stared blankly at his screen, tears streaming down his face. Even Dragon grunted and took a step back, his hand flying to his temple as if warding off a physical blow. They were all experiencing it. A torrent of images, emotions, and raw data. Eris, whose mind had been subconsciously attuned to the ranch's frequencies for weeks, received the message most clearly. He saw the universe not as a collection of galaxies, but as a network of conduits, a web of gateways built by a civilization so ancient that it considered the Big Bang to be a recent local event. They were not conquerors. They were engineers, gardeners of reality itself. He saw the gateway at the ranch for what it was, a minor backwater junction, but one that had fallen into disrepair over countless millennia. The consuming wave was not an attack. It was a containment failure, a leak. The gateway had become unstable, and it was now connecting not just to its intended destinations in the network, but to the chaotic, unformed realities that existed between the stable universes, a place the data stream called Bleed. The fractal wave was raw, cancerous reality, rewriting everything it touched into a meaningless, metastatic state. He saw the ship at Saturn. It was not an invader. It was a warden, an automated custodian of the network. Its programming was simple and brutal. When a junction fails and risks contaminating the network, sterilize the local system. The particle beam it had prepared was not an act of malice, but of cosmic quarantine. It was going to cauterize the wound by incinerating the entire planet. And he saw the visitor. It was a traveler, a being whose nature was far beyond their comprehension, who had been using the network to move between universes. It had been in transit when the gateway malfunctioned, and it had been thrown out of the tunnel and stranded on Earth when Eris's countersignal had forced the emergency shutdown. The visitor's actions since arriving had not been hostile. They had been a desperate, frantic attempt to communicate the true nature of the crisis. It had reactivated the nanites and built the spire not to call for an attack, but to deliver this very message, to warn them. The flood of information ceased as abruptly as it began. The beam from the spire vanished. The melodic signal faded. The screens in the command center returned to normal. Eris gasped, falling to his knees, the weight of the revelation crushing him. He looked at the others, saw the same horrified understanding dawning in their eyes. It's not an enemy. Eris choked out the words, feeling pitifully inadequate. It's a survivor. It's trapped here. The gateway is broken, and something far worse than that fractal wave is trying to get through from the bleed. He pointed a shaking finger at the monitor showing the Saturn feed. That ship, the Warden, it was going to destroy us to stop the leak. The visitor, it just told it to stand down. It told the Warden that there was intelligent local life here and that we might be able to help. And as if to confirm his words, the image from the Sky Eye Observatory updated. The glowing offensive aperture on the Warden ship slowly retracted, the immense weapon powered down. The immediate threat of planetary annihilation was, for the moment, over. The command center was silent, save for the ragged breathing of its occupants. They had been playing a game of checkers, only to be told they were pieces in a multi-dimensional chess match they couldn't begin to comprehend. Dragon finally lowered his hand from his comms unit, his thumb no longer resting on the transmit button. The sniper on the ridge had just become utterly, terrifyingly obsolete. He looked at the monitor, showing the lone, slender figure of the visitor standing silently in the triangle beside its crystalline spire. It was no longer a target. It was their only source of information, their only guide in this new terrifying reality. "Help, Dragon," said his voice hoarse. "How are we supposed to help it fix an interdimensional highway?" Eris got to his feet, his mind once broken by the ranch's impossibilities, now forged into something new by the visitor's message. He looked at the data, now scrolling through his own thoughts equations that describe the physics of gateway stabilization schematics for resonant dampeners, the chaotic, terrifying mathematics of the bleed. I think Eris said a strange, terrifying new confidence in his voice. It's just shown me how. It methodically strips away the familiar tropes of simple UFO encounters or hostile invasions, replacing them with a complex ecosystem of ancient technology automated systems and disparate forms of non-human intelligence. The narrative strength lies in its gradual revelation, forcing both the characters and the reader to constantly reevaluate their understanding of the alien presence. This analysis will deconstruct the story's depiction of extraterrestrials by focusing on 4 key areas: the nature of their physics-defying technology, the taxonomy of different alien intelligences presented the evolution of communication from indecipherable signals to direct conceptual transfer, and the profound recalibration of humanity's place within this newly unveiled cosmic context. The nature of alien technology infrastructure, not artifacts. From the outset, the story frames the alien presence not as a single ship or object, but as a vast, ancient, and deeply embedded infrastructure. The initial mystery of the Mesa is not a crash saucer, but a power station or gateway, a piece of a larger functional network. This technological presence is defined by its ability to manipulate the fundamental laws of physics in ways that are incomprehensible to the human scientists. Manipulation of space-time. The core of the alien technology is its mastery over the fabric of space-time itself. This is demonstrated most dramatically by the wormhole connecting the triangle and the east field. The LiDAR scan revealing a perfect, massive, shimmering tube of distorted space confirms that the phenomena are not isolated events, but are linked by a stable transport corridor. The story cleverly illustrates the effects of this manipulation through the failure of human technology. The GPS systems of the drones do not simply fail. They are momentarily translocated, reporting their position with perfect accuracy within a localized frame of reference that has been teleported half a mile away. This is not jamming or spoofing. It is the temporary rewriting of spatial coordinates, a concept far beyond human capability. Similarly, the 6 gigahertzes. Signal that seems to come from everywhere at once violates the inverse square law because it is not propagating through normal space, but echoing through the gateway, emerging from multiple points simultaneously. Active and reactive systems. A crucial element of the technology is that it is not passive. It is an active, intelligent, and often defensive system. The repeated failure of the drilling beacon at a precise depth is the first clue. The system is not merely blocking the signal with passive interference, it is deleting it, an act of active and targeted response. Dragon's observation that the ranch responds is repeatedly proven true. During the first drone experiment, the appearance of a UAP is directly correlated with a cascading communications failure. This suggests an automated immune system designed to neutralize intrusive technologies. The entity or system does not communicate with warnings. It communicates by surgically disabling the threat, showcasing a cold, machine-like efficiency. This active nature turns the ranch from a place of mystery into an intelligent, unpredictable adversary. Matter and energy conversion. The aliens' technological mastery extends to the atomic level. The consuming wave is the most terrifying example of this. Described as a self-replicating force that rewrites matter, it is a form of terraforming, or, more accurately, conversion. It doesn't destroy, it transforms sandstone into humming crystals and sagebrush into metallic growths. This is the work of von Neumann probes, or nanites, a technology that can deconstruct and reconstruct matter according to a new blueprint. The inert gray dust left in its wake is not debris, but dormant nanites waiting for a command signal. This reveals that the very ground of the ranch is in places a programmable substrate. Furthermore, the energy displays are clean and precise. The pulse that disables all digital watches and the force that ejects the 480-foot drill string are immense expenditures of energy without any corresponding radioactive fallout or messy explosions. It is controlled, efficient, and operates on principles that leave no trace, further emphasizing its advanced and alien nature. A taxonomy of alien intelligences. The story carefully avoids presenting a monolithic alien race. Instead, it unveils a complex cosmic hierarchy with different entities fulfilling distinct roles, much like a terrestrial ecosystem has producers, consumers, and decomposers. The ancient engineers, the gardeners. The builders of the Gateway Network are the first and most mysterious intelligence. They are never seen, but their presence is inferred from the sheer scale and age of their creation. The message received by Eris describes them as a civilization so ancient that it considered the Big Bang to be a recent local event. They are not conquerors, but engineers, gardeners of reality itself. This positions them as godlike beings who operate on cosmological timescales, treating universes as nodes in a network. The ranch is merely a minor backwater junction of their vast creation, now fallen into disrepair. Their intelligence is so far removed from humanity's that it is only perceptible through its decaying billion-year-old works, much like humans might study the fossilized remains of an extinct species. The Warden, the automated custodian, the city-sized artifact orbiting Saturn, represents a second tier of intelligence, a powerful, automated, and brutally logical custodian. It is not presented as a ship full of sentient beings, but as a warden, a machine programmed with a simple, terrifying directive to sterilize any contamination to the network. When the ranch gateway malfunctions, the warden's response is not to investigate or communicate, but to prepare a particle beam to cauterize the wound by incinerating the entire planet. This intelligence is non-emotional and purely programmatic. Its actions are not born of malice, but of an unyielding adherence to its function. It represents the cold, impersonal logic of a cosmic maintenance system, where the preservation of the network's integrity far outweighs the existence of a nascent, localized intelligence like humanity. The Warden is a stark reminder that in this cosmic order, human existence is not inherently valuable, it is merely a variable in a much larger equation. The traveler, the visitor, the final and most immediate intelligence encountered is the visitor. It is the first truly sentient being the team interacts with, and its arrival shatters all their preconceptions. Physically, it is utterly alien, 8 feet tall, slender with a cold body temperature and light-absorbing skin moving with an unnatural grace. However, its actions are driven by a very relatable motivation: survival. Thrown from the gateway during the shutdown, it is a castaway, a survivor stranded in a hostile environment. Its intelligence is demonstrated not through aggression, but through sophisticated problem-solving and communication. It repurposes the dormant nanites to construct a complex broadcasting device, not as a weapon, but as a means to transmit a vast amount of information. The visitor represents the individual within the grand cosmic structure. It is not a god or a machine, but a being with agency facing a crisis. This reframes the entire narrative from a story of invasion to one of a shared predicament. The evolution of communication from noise to pure concept. One of the most compelling threads in the narrative is the evolving challenge of interspecies communication. The story presents a four-stage progression from raw, damaging data to a seamless transfer of pure meaning. Stage 1, incomprehensible data dump. The first recorded communication is the experience of Elias Thorne in 1973. He doesn't receive a message. His mind is disassembled by a raw, unfiltered stream of data from the gateway. He sees past, present, and future simultaneously, along with things of impossible geometry. This is not communication. It is a catastrophic information overload that shatters his psyche. It demonstrates that the gateway's raw output is fundamentally incompatible with the human mind. Stage 2. Puzzling signals and actions for Eris's team communication begins as a scientific puzzle. The 1.6 gigahertz signal is the primary object of study. Initially just a hum, it becomes a structured signal with chirps and warbles suggesting language or data. However, the more direct communication from the ranch is kinetic. It disables their equipment. The repeated failure of the drill beacon and the shutdown of the drones are messages in themselves, nonverbal warnings that say, "You are not welcome. Your technology is a threat." Stage 3, the universal primer, the first intentional comprehensible message sent by the alien intelligence, is the Arecibo in reverse. After the energy surge, the MESA broadcasts a packet of data containing fundamental constants, the fine structure constant, the atomic mass of hydrogen, and a representation of a DNA helix. This is a brilliant narrative device showing an intelligence that understands how to communicate with a scientifically literate species. It is a universal primer, a calling card that says, "We understand the fundamentals of your reality and your biology. We are intelligent." Stage 4, direct conceptual transfer. The visitor's crystalline spire represents the apex of communication. The beam it projects is not a radio wave, but a broadcast infection or a software update for the human mind. It bypasses language and sensory input, entirely pouring a torrent of pure conceptual information directly into the consciousness of the team. In an instant, they understand the history of the network, the function of the warden, the nature of the bleed, and the visitor's own plight. This form of communication is absolute, undeniable, and incredibly efficient. It is a telepathy born of superior technology, and it is the key to resolving the conflict. It shows that the visitor's intelligence is not just different, but operates on a higher plane of informational exchange. Humanity's new cosmic context, from apex predator to roadside mechanic. The ultimate effect of these revelations is the complete and terrifying recontextualization of humanity's place in the universe. The story masterfully demolishes the anthropocentric worldview held by its protagonist, Dr. Eris Thorne. Initially, Eris arrives as the ultimate skeptic, believing in an orderly and comprehensible universe governed by known laws. Skinwalker Ranch is an anomaly to be debunked, a puzzle to be solved and placed within the existing framework of human science. His journey is one of forced humility. He discovers that the laws he cherishes are merely local ordinances and that he is standing in a wild, lawless frontier where the rules are written by someone else. By the end, humanity's position has been irrevocably altered. They are not the sole proprietors of intelligence on their own planet, but tenants living unknowingly beside a failing piece of interdimensional infrastructure. The immediate threat is not an alien invasion, but a cosmic industrial accident. The consuming wave is not an attack, but a leak of cancerous reality from the bleed, a chaotic space between universes. This brilliantly reframes the central conflict. The enemy is not the aliens, but the shared threat of the gateway's decay. This leads to the final profound shift in humanity's role. The warden was prepared to sterilize Earth to contain the leak. The visitor, however, communicates that there is intelligent local life here and that we might be able to help. In the face of a problem that requires both cosmic knowledge and localized physical action, humanity is suddenly promoted from a specimen to be sterilized to a potential collaborator. Eris, who came to debunk, is now the only person who, armed with the visitor's downloaded knowledge, might be able to help repair the gateway. Humanity's value in this new cosmos is not its power or its dominion, but its specific adaptable intelligence. They have gone from being masters of their world to being potential roadside mechanics for a broken-down interdimensional highway. It is a far more humble, and perhaps far more important role than they could ever have imagined. In conclusion, the Skinwalker Enigma provides a rich and intelligent deconstruction of the first contact narrative. It moves beyond simple binaries of peaceful versus hostile aliens and instead presents a complex layered reality where different forms of intelligence, ancient, automated, and individual, coexist within a framework of incomprehensibly advanced technology. By focusing on the scientific process of discovery, the challenges of communication across an immense cognitive gap, and the ultimate humbling of the human perspective, the story crafts a compelling and thought-provoking vision of humanity's first true glimpse into the vast, ancient, and terrifyingly indifferent universe that exists just beyond the veil of our perception. Building upon the established nature of the alien technology and intelligence, a deeper reading of the Skinwalker enigma reveals a rich internal conflict within the human response itself. This conflict is embodied by the ideological struggle between its two central characters, Dr. Eris Thorne and Kale Dragonmastos. Furthermore, the story's profound sense of terror is not derived from conventional horror tropes, but from a meticulously constructed architecture of existential dread built upon the successive dismantling of humanity's core assumptions about its own competence, reality, and significance. The dialectic of science and pragmatism, Eris and Dragon. The narrative is powerfully anchored by the dynamic between the scientist and the soldier, two figures representing humanity's primary methods for confronting the unknown. Their interaction serves as a philosophical dialogue on how to proceed when faced with a universe that refuses to conform to our rules. Eris Thorne, the shattering of the cage of reason. Eris begins the story as the perfect archetype of scientific rationalism. He believes in a universe governed by elegant, immutable laws and sees the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch as an offense to his sensibilities. His stated purpose is to be the ultimate skeptic, the man who will bring the hammer of rigorous science down on the anvil of high strangeness. His worldview is predicated on the belief that every problem has a rational solution. Eris's transformation is the story's central intellectual journey. It does not begin with a dramatic encounter, but with the quiet onset of intellectual fear. This feeling arises when the drill beacon fails in a way that defies all logical explanation. The data is clean, the equipment is sound, yet the result is impossible. It is the fear of a mathematician who finds a number that breaks all known rules. The drone swarm debacle is the point of no return. When Eris witnesses a drone collide with nothingness and subsequently be teleported half a mile away, his carefully constructed cage of reason is left riddled with holes. He finally begins to understand the profound terror he saw in his father's eyes. His evolution is completed when he proposes the second, larger experiment. He is no longer a passive observer seeking to debunk, but an active participant attempting to provoke a larger reaction. He has shifted from imposing known rules to trying to learn new ones by deliberately choosing to throw a rock at the beehive. This act earns him a flicker of respect from Dragon and signals the total collapse of his rigid rationalist worldview. Dragon the Evolution, from containment to trust. Dragon represents a wholly different approach. Forged by 2 decades in special operations, his worldview is shaped not by physical laws, but by the rules of survival. He is unconcerned with labeling phenomena. To him, it's all just weird as hell. His initial response is purely pragmatic: assess the threat, establish a perimeter, and control the situation. He looks at the mesa not as a geological mystery, but as a responsive intelligence that knows we're knocking on the door. Dragon's development is not about adopting the scientific method, but about learning to trust Eris's impossible conclusions. Throughout the story, he serves as a grim anchor to reality, constantly warning of the dangers, cautioning Eris that it might not be so gentle a second time. The climax of his character arc is the decision he makes when confronting the visitor. Every instinct, every ounce of his combat experience screams that the creature is a beachhead, a threat to be eliminated. The sniper has a confirmed unmissable shot. His decision to hold, based on Eris's desperate plea that the being is trying to communicate, is a monumental leap of faith. In that moment, he sets aside 20 years of tactical pragmatism to trust in an unknown that defies all precedent. He evolves from a protector focused solely on containment to a leader capable of embracing a new strategy, one founded on the possibility of understanding rather than the certainty of force. The architecture of existential dread. The horror in the Skinwalker enigma is not about monsters or jump scares. It is a more profound existential dread that builds layer by layer as the story systematically strips away humanity's foundational beliefs. The horror of technological impotence. The narrative begins by meticulously demonstrating the futility of human technology. A $500,000 drill string is lost without explanation. A multi-million-dollar drone experiment ends in catastrophic failure with expensive hardware raining from the sky. The ultimate insult comes when the multi-ton drilling rig is contemptuously impaled by its own 480-foot drill string, which the Mesa ejects like a javelin. The entity at the ranch does not meet human force with equal force, it simply turns human technology off. This creates a deep and unnerving sense of powerlessness. Humanity's best tools are not just ineffective, they are irrelevant like children's toys in the face of an adult. The horror of a dissolving reality. The dread escalates when it is not just technology that fails, but reality itself. Elias Thorne's experience in 1973 is the prologue to this terror. His mind is not attacked. It is disassembled by a raw data stream that the human brain cannot process. The consuming wave is the physical manifestation of this horror. It does not burn or destroy, it rewrites reality, transforming sandstone into humming crystalline structures. This is the fear of losing not just one's life, but the very nature of existence. It reveals that the physical laws humans consider immutable are merely local ordinances, and that their stable reality borders a chaotic, unformed space called the bleed, which could leak through at any moment. The horror of cosmic insignificance. This is the narrative's terrifying core. The ultimate shock is not that the aliens are hostile, but that humanity is too insignificant to even be considered an enemy. The chilling phrase, "it just rang the dinner bell," frames humanity not as an opponent in a conflict, but as bait. The revelation about the Warden is the pinnacle of this humbling. The city-sized machine at Saturn is not preparing for war out of malice, it is simply following its programming. Its planned sterilization of the entire planet is not an act of war, but cosmic quarantine. Humanity in its entirety has been reduced to a non-essential variable, an acceptable loss to ensure the network's stability. Their salvation is equally humbling. They are spared not because they fought back and won, but because the stranded visitor informs the Warden that the intelligent local life here might be able to help. Humanity's new role in the cosmos is defined in that instant not as masters or conquerors, but as potential mechanics for a broken interdimensional highway. It is a profound and final humiliation, the realization that in the grand scheme of the universe, our existence is conditional, and our survival may depend entirely on our utility to forces far beyond our comprehension. Beyond the character dynamics and the nature of the alien presence, the Skinwalker enigma embeds a deeper commentary on human methodology itself. This is primarily illustrated through the symbolic clash of technologies human versus alien, and frames the entire narrative not just as a first contact scenario, but as a desperate escalating quest to find a common language. The story suggests that humanity's failure to understand the universe is not due to a lack of power, but a failure of communication. Technology as a reflection of intent, a clash of methodologies. The story presents three distinct tiers of technology, each representing a different approach to confronting the unknown. The failure of the first two and the success of the third serve as a powerful allegory for the intellectual evolution required to face a truly alien intelligence. 1. The drill, the methodology of brute force. The initial human approach to the Mesa is the horizontal drilling operation. This technology is the perfect symbol of humanity's traditional scientific method, invasive, linear, and extractive. The goal is to physically penetrate the mystery, to break off a piece of it, a core sample, and to drag it back into the light for analysis. It is a methodology built on the assumption that the unknown is a physical object that can be subjected to force and dissected. The Mesa's response is a complete and utter rejection of this approach. It doesn't just resist, it actively sabotages the effort by disabling the guidance beacon at a precise depth. The ultimate symbolic gesture is the violent ejection of the entire 480-foot drill string, turning humanity's own tool of inquiry into a weapon against its own machinery. The message is clear: the secrets of this place cannot be taken by force. A methodology based on physical intrusion is not only inadequate, but will be met with contemptuous and overwhelming opposition. 2. The drones, the methodology of sophisticated observation. Representing a significant step up in sophistication, the drone swarm experiment symbolizes the modern data-driven approach to knowledge. Instead of brute force, this is about observation mapping and network-centric analysis. The plan to paint the sky with 1,000 GPS-guided drones is an elegant attempt to reveal the invisible by tracking minute deviations in their flight paths. This is humanity at its most clever, using a distributed, non-invasive system to gather information. Yet this too results in catastrophic failure. The system is defeated not by a superior force, but by a superior understanding of physics. The drone systems are not just jammed, their very perception of reality is manipulated. Their GPS believes they have been teleported half a mile away and they are knocked out of the sky by collisions with invisible high-speed objects. This failure demonstrates the limits of an observational methodology when the very fabric of space-time, the medium of observation, is being actively controlled. You cannot map a territory whose fundamental coordinates are in flux. Even our most advanced observational tools are useless when the rules of observation themselves are being rewritten. 3. The visitor's spire, the methodology of constructive communication. The visitor's technology is fundamentally different from both the drill and the drones. It is not extractive or observational, it is constructive and communicative. Using the dormant nanites left by the consuming wave, the visitor doesn't analyze the environment, it assembles a tool from it. The crystalline spire is not a weapon or a sensor. It is a communications device, a pure information carrier. Its success, where all human technology failed, is the story's central thesis. The spire does not try to take a sample or map the humans. Instead, it initiates a direct conceptual data transfer, a broadcast infection that bypasses the limitations of language and sensory input to deliver pure meaning. This technology succeeds because its purpose is to bridge the cognitive gap, not to gather data. It represents a higher form of interaction, one based on sharing knowledge rather than extracting it. The narrative is a quest for translation. Viewed through this lens, the entire plot of the Skinwalker Enigma is a series of escalating attempts at translation, moving from incoherent noise to perfect understanding. Stage 1. The Dialogue of the Deaf. The initial state of the ranch is one of complete communication failure. The mesa speaks through a low-frequency hum, a feeling of dread and raw data streams that shatter human minds. This is not a message, but a raw, untranslated output that is toxic to human consciousness. Humanity, in turn, speaks back with a drill bit. This is a dialogue of the deaf, where both sides are using methods utterly incomprehensible and damaging to the other. Stage 2. Communication through action and reaction. The conflict escalates to a more direct, albeit still primitive, form of communication. The ranch speaks by disabling equipment. This is a clear, nonverbal message. Stop. Your presence here is disruptive. The humans led by Eris interpret this not as a warning, but as a puzzle, and speak back by poking the hornet's nest with a larger, more provocative experiment. This stage is defined by a feedback loop of action and reaction, a physical conversation of cause and effect, but one still devoid of shared meaning or intent. Stage 3. The first shared word. The broadcast of the universal primer, the fine structure constant, the mass of hydrogen, and the DNA helix is the story's most critical turning point in communication. For the first time, the alien intelligence translates its existence into a language humanity can unequivocally understand, the language of physics and biology. It is the equivalent of pointing to an object and speaking its name. This single act transforms the phenomenon from a hostile, unknowable force into a confirmed intelligent entity capable of and willing to attempt communication. It is the first shared syllable in a new language. Stage 4. Eris the translator and the perfect message. The story's climax is the ultimate act of successful translation. The visitor spire achieves what no human device could: perfect communication. The flood of pure meaning into the minds of the team is the final successful transmission. The conflict is resolved not with a weapon or a clever scientific countermeasure, but with a message. Eris, having been subconsciously attuned to the ranch's frequencies and possessing the scientific mind to process the data, becomes the de facto translator. His final awestruck statement, I think, it's just shown me how marks his final transformation. He is no longer just a scientist. He is the first human interpreter for an alien reality tasked with translating impossible knowledge into practical action. In conclusion, the Skinwalker Enigma uses the contrasting success and failure of different technologies to argue a profound point. Confronting the truly alien does not require stronger drills or more sensitive cameras. It requires a radical evolution in methodology, away from extraction and observation and towards connection and translation. The ultimate barrier to understanding the universe is not physical distance or technological limitation, but the cognitive and linguistic gap between vastly different forms of intelligence. The story's final triumph is not one of force, but of finding a way to finally and desperately understand.